this episode, we look at Creative Commons licensing. Creative Commons is an international, non-profit organisation that provides free licenses and tools that copyright owners can use to allow others to share, reuse, or remix their material legally. In this episode, Dr. Tama Lever from Curtin University explains some of the different types and combinations of these licenses and offers some useful insights into which might be better suited for academic purposes.
Okay, so this is the basic explanation page on the Creative Commons website, which shows the basic licensing conditions that you have. So there are 4 elements that can be used in Creative Commons license, and there are 6 possible combinations. So that sounds a little bit complicated, but it's actually very, very straightforward. So I'll just run through how they work. Your most basic condition is attribution. And what that means is, on an attribution license, you might say, who was the original creator of this work and where can this original work be found? That is a basic condition of all Creative Commons licenses. On top of that, you can have a share-alike license. And what a share-alike license tells you is that anything that you create that borrows from these works must also be licensed in a similar manner. So it basically says you have to keep the chain of sharing going. You also have a non-commercial element, and a non-commercial element says you can do what you like with this, depending on the other clauses, but you cannot make money off it. Now, there has been a huge debate about what that means. Does it mean education, since more and more educational institutions are commercial? But the general understanding is that that means most educational purposes are just fine, but explicit commercial use, i.e. using it in a music video or in a video or as a commercial photographer, that would be crossing the line. And finally, you have no derivative works. What that means is that you cannot take an element of this and use it in your work. The reason that that's there is that many people might say, for example, musicians might want to put a free version of one of their songs up on the web, but they don't want 1,000 remixes made. They just want to share it for free so people can get a feel for it. That's generally how no derivatives works is used. Now, it's important to flag that this doesn't override fair dealing. Now, even on a no derivative works license, obviously you can still quote under fair dealing. And it's interesting that every Creative Commons license now has a little disclaimer that says this does not override fair dealing or fair use depending on the jurisdiction that you're talking about. Now, there are 6 ways that those elements can be recombined, and we'll just go really quickly run through the 6 possibilities and indeed talk about which ones are best for education. Now, your most basic license is your attribution license, which says you say who created it and where you can find this work. This is brilliant for education because basically this is the same as the sort of citation rules that we've worked with as academics. And it does mean you can use it in commercial and non-commercial senses. You can post it back on the web. You can just send it to your tutor. Whatever you need to do, you can do it with an attribution license as long as you give credit. So that's, if you can aim for a particular license, that's your best one because it means you don't have a lot to think about afterwards as long as you're clear credit. Then you've got your attribution share alike, which basically says, okay, attribute it, say who created it, and anything you create using that work as an element of it must have a similar license. So for example, if students use this in a PowerPoint presentation or in a short film, that short film or PowerPoint presentation would also have to have an attribution share alike license on it, so it keeps the chain going. Now that is something of a restriction, so students do need to think about whether they're comfortable doing that or not. Attribution no derivatives means that you have to say who made it and you can't cut pieces out of it, so you have to just use it the way it is. So you might be able to play it in its entirety to demonstrate a point in a lecture, but you can't resample it and use it in a mashup, for example. Then we've got attribution non-commercial share alike, which is all of those preceding ones, and you can't make money off it. And then you have attribution non-commercial, no derivatives. So that's your most restrictive end. For students, generally, you would encourage them to stick with the licenses which are attribution or attribution non-commercial or attribution share alike if they're comfortable to license their work in exactly the same way. It is, of course, the case that, yes, if you stick something on the web, someone might misuse it. That's a reality of the way that the web works today. The good thing about Creative Commons is that there is a global dedicated team of people trying to make Creative Commons work. And there are a lot of very, very top lawyers who will come to your aid if your Creative Commons license is violated. And that's a legal protection very few people enjoy. If someone violates a Creative Commons license, it is usually the local Creative Commons team that will be your first port of call. The great thing about Creative Commons is that they have a license generator. So if you want to go in and license, you go to creativecommons.org, hit the license button, and it will bring up a tool which basically walks you through the process. So in this case, it asks me, do I want to allow commercial uses of my work? I will say yes. It says, do I want to allow modifications of my work? So could someone remix? Could someone take an element of my photograph and use it in different ways? I will say yes, but only as long as they share it under a similar license. And what is my jurisdiction? Now, Australian students should choose Australia, not generic, not the United States. Choose the country that you're working in, because that gives you the most ironclad legal protection. Now, it's not hugely important because the licenses are comparable. Every different jurisdiction works in pretty much the same way, but it's better to just stick with the exact nature of the country that you're in. Now, once you've done that, you've already chosen which license that you want. Then you can tell the license generator what form is the work in. So for example, if I chose audio or video, it would generate a different sort of license and it would tell me how to embed that in the file. Where would you go in the file to put it there? But let's, for argument's sake, say that I was doing an image. Then I might type in the title of the work. I'll call it Tama's Great Pick 1. And then I can, if I want to insert other information, I'm not going to in this case because I don't need it. I'll hit select a license, and it will tell me the sort of license that I've selected and give me both a visual representation of that and a code that I can cut and paste into a document or into the bottom of the screen. For example, if I'm posting it onto my blog, if I cut and paste this at the bottom of the screen, not only does it have a link back to the license, but it embeds metadata so that when a search engine like Google looks at that page, it understands this is a Creative Commons license under this license. So when you check for it under the Creative Commons search in Google, it knows what it can and can't find. So the licensing tool is actually incredibly straightforward. And the great thing, of course, is when I click through, it still takes me to a human readable license first. So it is important to remember that Creative Commons isn't everything. It doesn't give you all permissions. It's only as far as normal copyright law goes. If you don't want anyone to ever misuse it in any way, then yes, you probably shouldn't have it online. But if you're willing to take fairly minor risk, then Creative Commons licenses are actually a really good way, because if you've already given some permissions away, people are much less likely to misuse it because they usually will respect the ethos of sharing that you've already bought into.